I think advocates like create this like panacea that if the federal government does this, then all of a sudden everything is going to be copacetic in the industry and all of our problems are going to go away. We're just going to have new problems.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to an episode of The Dime. I'm Brian Fields. With me, as always, is Ellen Finney. And this week, we got a very special guest, Jeff Guillot, managing partner of Mad Global Strategy. Jeff, thanks for taking the time. How you doing today?
I'm awesome. Good to be with you guys. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, we're stoked to have you here. My mic just fell over. Sorry about that. Kellen, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. My mic is standing up. And I'm excited to talk to Jeff.
Operation I've walked into here, I can tell.
Yeah, very sophisticated over here.
Yeah.
I'm excited to talk to Jeff and dive into politics and government affairs associated with cannabis, which is always one of the best topics, especially recently. How are you doing, Brian?
Yeah, I'm stoked. I think given the state of the world and all the things that Trump is signing off, maybe as we're recording, we're going to put Jeff on the hot seat and try to make sense of it all, and then maybe dive into some fun, really local stories here for New York and all the things that are going on here. So Jeff, before we get started, I know you are one of the founding members of the Long Island Dad Supporting Dads community, but it's really important to put you on the record from East Coast, West Coast battle. Where would your alliance be?
You know, I'm a Long Island guy, born and raised. And while I have a great deal of love for all things West Coast, it's lovely to visit, but home is here. And I am a proud charter member of the Long Island Cannabis Dads Lunch Club. The requirements for that are very simple. You have to live on Long Island, have reproduced, and work somewhere in cannabis, and you're in. It's been a really fun networking group, which is how I got to meet Brian, and what brings me in front of the millions and millions of listeners that will be consuming this content.
Yeah, shout out to Jordan for Dad Supporting Dad. So Jeff, before we dive in, can you give a little background about yourself and how you found your way to the cannabis space?
Yeah, sure. So for the last 12 years, I ran a government affairs and public affairs and political campaign firm called Millennial Strategies with offices on Long Island and in Manhattan. That was a great ride. In August, my partner, Alex Voch, and I decided to sell that company to a larger national firm called Mad Global Strategy. And I now run their New York government affairs and public affairs practice. So now, we have reach across the country. We're looking at fun projects in the cannabis space and outside of the cannabis space. And, as far as how I started doing weed stuff, we originally got hired by the Drug Policy Alliance through a mutual friend during one of the failed attempts to legalize recreational in New York. And one thing led to another, as it often does in this business. Like when you're a lobbyist, you don't advertise your services like in the penny saver or like really anywhere. It's 90% referrals and word of mouth and stuff like that. And that's what ended up happening. So, the Drug Policy Alliance led us to working for Ease, which led us to working for PACS, which led us to working for some of the drink guys and some of the early movers in the agricultural space. And now here in 2025, here we are, regretting only some of it.
Love it. So for some of the clients you work with, is it a consistent, ongoing effort in order to achieve certain goals? Or is it more so where it's like, once we achieve that goal, it's about continuing the growth in certain areas? How does that all work? And give us a breakdown of some of the current clients you're working with.
Yeah. So, the joke in this business is congratulations, you won, now you're fired. So like sometimes we engage for X period of time to achieve Y result. And we have some clients that just have ongoing needs and want to have representation on retainer at all times for whatever the circumstances that are in front of them, right? Like, so it's really twofold. We've gotten calls from guys who are in a total crisis and need help right now. And we get hired by smarter people who see crisis coming 6 months from now and want to prepare for that moment in time.
That's probably like the perfect balance, right? Of understanding, okay.
Yeah, for sure.
If you see the problem coming, now is the best approach. But I would assume most people don't have the wherewithal or the ability financially, maybe currently, to say, I see a problem in 6 months, I got to hire Jeff now.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And we try to be honest with people, right? Like, I got a call from a guy last year and he was describing his problem. He represented a transportation company that was imminently going to be put out of business or close to it by an existing proposed law, right? And I'm like, okay, so what's the status of that proposed law? Like, how can we help? And he goes, well, it's heading to the governor's desk. She's going to act on it in 10 days. And I'm like, where was this phone call like 3 freaking weeks ago or 3 months ago? I could have helped you then, but now you're dead. Because you waited too long and you were cheap. So like, there's a delicate balance, and you see that a lot in the cannabis space, where folks wait until their license is about to expire, or their crop is about to die, and then they're like, oh, okay, maybe I should hire somebody. Which is not the way to go about it. It's the same thing as having a lawyer on standby. It's the same thing as having a good accountant and things like that. Like you should be able to utilize us in any circumstance, not just when your hair's on fire and the world's about to end.
Your guys' services like apply universally to like every different jurisdiction in every different state. For instance, say you help out someone in New York on a cultivation problem, they have a similar cultivation issue, even though it's like different regulatory aspects, you guys kind of still like deploy the same playbook. Like, what's that kind of look like?
Well, so the answer to the first part of the question is yes. Like we can do work in any state, and also like we've done a lot of work in municipalities, right? Like doing work on Long Island is very different than doing work in the 5 boroughs of New York City, and is very different than doing work in Jersey City, right? For example. And so yes to that, but anyone who does what I do and rolls out the same playbook every time is destined to fail. Like every state, every engagement, and all this, everything is like a forensic exercise unto itself. Right. There is a different bespoke strategy, because at the end of the day, you're selling ideas and convincing people to do something that they probably wouldn't otherwise want to do. Right. And so like the message you use to move an issue should change all the time. And by the way, should be inherently iterative, because as we've found out in the days since January the 20th, government can be unpredictable at times, and folks have to learn to adapt.
So Jeff, if I got a problem or I see a problem coming up, but I'm unsure if A, you can help me, or B, if it's even achievable, how much uncertainty is too much uncertainty for you to be like, hey, like there is a 10% chance that we can make a step here, but there's going to be a 60% step that we're going to be unsure, because at the end of the day, not only do you two have to be on the same page, you then have to go convince someone else to make some sort of change or somewhere on the line that might be completely outside your control.
So like the joke with political campaigns oftentimes is that like 50% of the outcome of any election is based upon what you do. The other half is complete trivia. It's all based on where the national headwinds are going and what's happening around you, right? So like we definitely work in a world where that you have to always accept a certain amount of uncertainty and be able to mitigate risk accordingly. But like I've been doing this long enough, and like I don't need your money badly enough that I'm gonna blow smoke up your ass. Like some of my favorite conversations, and maybe it's like makes me a dark and deranged person, or like dark and cynical after all this time, but some of my favorite conversations are when I get to tell someone no. Like that is a fanciful pie in the sky bong water idea, and I'm not going to do it. And by the way, like I'm sure if you call 10 more of me, you'll find some moron who will take your money, but I'm not going to do that, because at the end of the day too, like we have a reputation, and like I can't go to state senators and members of Congress and mayors with batshit crazy ideas. It's not going to work. So like we try to stay grounded in reality, and like I will tell you if your idea is dumb.
If it's on the fence, will you like?
You're on. There's idiots everywhere.
If it's kind of like in that gray area, will you kind of like phase it out and be like, hey, let me go test the waters, and then I'll get back to you and see if like it really is crazy, or if there's actually maybe a little bit of traction there.
Yeah, we've done that with folks before. Like, like we've had companies call us and be like, hey, we need help moving person X on Y issue. Can you do it? And I've, gone so far as to call the chief of staff to person X and be like, hey, any movement here? And, if the answer is no, like there's no movement, he's not changing, like, you're wasting your time, I'll tell the potential client, like, find someone else who will take your money. I'm like, I am not going to spin my wheels and end up in a situation where, I made a little bit of money, but you're unhappy at the end of the day, and then you're not going to utilize me next time something real happens. So like you always have to mitigate risk, and you have to be honest with who you're working with. Like no one has ever been upset with me if I tell them I don't know the answer to something. right? My mentor was a guy named Richard Brodsky, who was a member of the state assembly who I worked for before I went into the private sector. And, after numerous attempts of trying to give him a bullshit answer to a question, he finally said, listen, I don't know is a perfectly acceptable answer in any serious conversation. And I've taken that with me throughout my career. Like, if I don't know, I'm going to tell you I don't know. And, I was having a conversation with a client, an hour ago, when I explained to them, like, we're trying to do something from a regulatory perspective that no one has ever done. So I can't give you a reasonable timeline. I understand that you want to, figure out how long the meter is going to run here and how much money I'm going to spend to achieve X goal. But you asked me to do something that has never been attempted before, and I'm 80%, done with achieving that for you. But the last 20, I really don't know how long it's going to take, buddy. The other thing with government, and this is especially frustrating on the local level, in places like Long Island where it takes forever to do anything. You have to have patience, and oftentimes patience equals dollars.
The challenge, though, I didn't want to sabotage us and take us hard to right, so that's where the pause was.
Go for it, man.
We'll get into the Long Island. We'll get into the Long Island stuff. But I wanted to stay with the other stuff. So the I don't know, I think is direct, makes a ton of sense, and really clear. The biggest challenge, though, is you're trying to get others to do decisions that other people are pushing them maybe in other directions. Or it could be a timing issue. So I can only imagine the challenge for you of being going back to the client and being like, hey man, I tried and I did everything we said. And unfortunately, given the current state of the world and where things have been adjusted, we're just not going to be able to accomplish it in the next few weeks, few months, or unknown. That has to be extremely, extremely challenging conversations to have.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of challenging conversations in this line of work. I have taken some of the most bone-chilling, mind-numbing vetoes from 3 different governors over the last few years. I had a client whose bill, would have saved the lives of infants born with a certain genetic disorder if it had been signed by the governor, and Governor Hochul vetoed it on Christmas Eve. And so on Christmas Eve, I have to call my client and tell them I'm so sorry. After all this work, spending an entire year getting this to where it is, on the night Christ was born, you got screwed. That's tough stuff. It made my Christmas ham taste pretty freaking lousy, but that's the business,
So in those instances, is it a combination of there was an understanding that things were going to happen at the last moment, someone came in and persuaded her differently? Why do things change at the last minute?
In that instance, yes. In that instance, we thought we were on track to have the governor sign our bill into law. She had signed a similar bill into law for the same client 2 years previously. So we were pretty confident this was going to work. And then what happened was the national advocacy organization that deals with these kinds of issues literally stepped in 2 days before Christmas. They had shit else to do. They just decided that they were going to ruin my holiday and advised the governor to veto the bill, which she did. And of course, she did me the favor of mentioning in her veto message on whose behest she was acting. So that was a fun conversation in the new year.
I'm sure. So do you think those instances are small sample sizes of kind of how it works on a large scale for cannabis, or do you think cannabis operates just completely different?
Cannabis is a little bit different because in most states you had either the way cannabis has been legalized is it's 2 ways, right? You have either an act of the legislature like it was in New York where former Governor Cuomo got strong-armed into signing it, or else they're going to embarrass him by overriding his veto, or like you've seen in Maine and Nevada and places like that, it gets voted on by the public, and then the state has to figure out how to make as poorly regulated a market as possible. It tends to be how it goes. So with cannabis specifically, you have a state regulator that has been created either by the people or by the legislature, and they make a lot of the rules. There is not a whole lot of legislating done outside of state regulators. There is some, don't get me wrong. Like, there's a handful of cannabis bills out there that may end up passing that modify the structure, right? The governor recently signed a bill to extend the cannabis farmers market program, for example, which they should have never stopped. That was stupid. Most cannabis related lobbying, not just in New York, but in most other states, is lobbying either the governor's office or the regulators directly, which in New York is a special time.
And so then how does one kind of facilitate change within these governing bodies? Is it just kind of conversations within those organizations with the right people? Kind of talk us through that whole process.
You have to present empirical data as to why they should change their regulations from X to Y. Right? For a while, for example, New York was saying no to a lot of out-of-state inputs into cannabis, right? They were saying that like terpenes from other states were not welcome here, which, is like kind of really quite parochial by the state, right? Like think about it. If you're brewing beer, right? You guys drink beer? Yeah. Okay. Like why would you not use like hops from another state to brew your beer? If you're making wine, why are you not using grapes from another place, right? Forget international stuff, just like from another state, right? If you're making a delicious blueberry ale, well, the best blueberries come from New Jersey. They're not from New York. So like go to the Garden State, pick up some blueberries, drive them across state lines and stick them in your beer. That's perfectly legal. Like why can't you do it with weed products? It makes no sense. So they've softened on that a little bit.
Do you think the original intention was to try to create robust economic self-sufficient industry solely here in New York?
Oh yeah. I mean, New York's ethos is that New York does it better than everyone else. Therefore, we can prop up an entire multi-billion-dollar industry without caring what the other 49 states do or engaging with the other 49 states. And again, this is not unique to cannabis. You have to really tread lightly when you approach regulators in New York and say, X state does this, therefore we should do it. The dumbest thing you can do as a lobbyist is go to any regulator in any issue, any department, anywhere in New York and say, California does this, so we should do this. That's a great way to get your issue to go nowhere. Probably because we're so alike in a lot of ways. We are just dismissive of anything that works in the West Coast.
Why?
That's a fantastic question. And I think that, look, the history of time is written by people warring with each other, not because they are so very different, because they're alike, save one thing, right? I'm not going to get into like religion and politics and all that stuff, but there is a reason why people on Long Island are raised with a deep disdain for Staten Island, right? Like, I don't know why I hate Staten Island. I don't. I was raised that way, right? And I think that like those biases exist everywhere, right? Like, what is the joke that they tell on the Ohio State campus? What do you do if a Michigan grad knocks on your front door? You pay for the pizza. People hate each other because they're so similar, and that's part of it.
Sure, but at the same part, like, have you been there when you saw somebody say California does that to know that just like resonates so?
Oh yeah. Oh God. We were working on with a housing client, right? Trying to pass some really common sense housing legislation that went absolutely nowhere because, we could talk about how bad New York and specifically Long Island are building housing another day. But, this is one of these instances where my client didn't listen to me. And I said, do not mention that this legislation works in California. Just don't you say it, right? 3 minutes into the meeting, well, it works in California. I'm like, but here we go. Like now all of a sudden you're the teacher in Charlie Brown. Like they are not, you're wah, 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 wah. They're not listening to you anymore. They're counting the minutes until you leave their office.
And I'm assuming a meeting like that is one that you had to clear through some of the staffers in order to achieve, right, the listening party.
Yep. Yeah. Like scheduling some of these meetings is like half the battle with being good at this work. I happen to have like a longtime staffer named Jenny Kate, who I believe you've met, Brian, who has done most of our scheduling for the last 6 years, and is like the ninja of getting hard to achieve meetings. But like that's an art form in and of itself to convince someone who does not want to speak with you that they have to speak with you, because that can often involve like using other folks to influence someone else to get you your meeting.
Yeah, how does that work?
So, like for example, we were trying to get a meeting or in the early days of cannabis. We were trying to get a meeting with the Department of Health on something, and the New York State Department of Health had no interest in talking to us at all, none. So we had to go to the Assembly Health chairperson, who was sympathetic to our cause, and have their office call and be like, "Hey, morons, meet with these people." And so then they begrudgingly gave us our meeting. But like scoring the meeting can be half the battle. And like, yesterday, for example, I did, between myself, my staffer, and my client, we did about 20 meetings in Albany in one day, mostly on the same issue. And the art of packing all that into one day and executing on it, then executing the follow-up and getting what you need, it is an art form unto itself.
So I want to ask about this, right? So like you tried to take that meeting. They said, absolutely no, Jeff. Then you had to sit down and maybe whiteboard up like a brainstorming session of, okay, how are we going to find another entry point in? And is it like a list of like, these are the 10 best approaches we can utilize in order to go through? Let's just hit the phone and go. Is that how that goes?
It can be, but oftentimes it's more bespoke than that. Like, there have been times where we're like, all right, there are 2 people on planet Earth who have enough gravitas with this person to make them talk to us. So like we're going to have to figure out how to convince either one of those 2 people, and one of them probably hates us, the merits of the cause. And then, by the way, if I lean on the governor's staff to get me a meeting with an executive department, guess who now owes a favor to the governor's staff? So like, and so when they're having trouble getting somebody or talking to someone else's client or whatever the case may be, I get a phone call. Then that's how the world works.
How do you handle kind of some of the situations you just described where like you're in the meeting and you tell them not to say California and they say California, and that you just had to like pull strings to get the meeting? Like, what is that dialogue like? And like, what's the repercussions?
In that case, I was like, you just set yourself back 4 months. Like, I have to now like totally recalibrate our strategy and find a whole new way to do this, because like that person in that agency who you were talking to now thinks you're an idiot. So like we're gonna have to rejigger this whole thing. Yeah, we've had problems like that, or like when someone goes into subject matter that the person that we're meeting with is not prepared to discuss for any reason. This happens on the local level all the time, and happens in cannabis all the time, where you have a situation on the ground where you have the state, the OCM, the state's cannabis regulators, and they allow localities to opt in or opt out. This is the case in New Jersey, California, Colorado, et cetera. And the problem in a lot of these places is that the state does not communicate to the municipalities, who are the ones who ultimately have to zone and then allow for cannabis businesses to operate. So like when you're talking to local electeds about this, or about any new industry, by the way, it's not just cannabis, you have to understand there's going to be a learning curve, and like new information scares people and change scares people. So your job then becomes to make them feel comfortable with what you're about to do. And for a lot of people, selling drugs, not comfortable inherently. So like
the DARE program,
especially when you say it like that.
The DARE program exists for a reason, Jeff.
Right. Yes. Obviously, we all listen very, very intently in DARE. That worked out for a whole generation of millennials that stayed off of drugs. What a smashing success that thing was.
Can't imagine
what DARE shirt.
Back off. That's a fire shirt.
It is.
So let's talk.
If you still have your DARE shirt, that's amazing. And if the DARE shirt fits,
we got it for a Halloween outfit in college.
So it's not your OG DARE shirt.
No.
Not my OG one.
No, he's also younger than us too. So Jeff, let's talk about like the local municipalities like opting out, right? Because for them, especially in Long Island, and we can dive into this, is there was a ton of towns that opted out, and of course, given the framework of the world, delivery doesn't exist. So those poor people living in those areas were unable to get product. Is that part of the confusion? You think that they didn't realize that delivery still would exist and then the players that still lived in that area could still get product? Or do you think it was something else?
Well, look, I think there was ignorance across the board here. Like it is ignorance that inherently has led to like the civic associations and PTA moms of the world thinking that if I allow cannabis into my community, that my children will become addicted to heroin and insurance costs will rise and they're going to take our guns away. Like all of those arguments are framed in ignorance, right? When years ago, the former Nassau County executive asked me to be on the advisory panel on cannabis legalization. I don't even live in Nassau County. I don't know why I said yes. And I get sent into this meeting room with folks from law enforcement, folks from civic associations, chambers of commerce, PTAs, and just the level of profound stupid that was expressed by these people about what this actually means culturally, economically, and from a public safety perspective was mind-blowing. Like the most informed and, the second most pro-cannabis voice in the room were the cops. Unbelievable. And that's still the case now, even in the opt-in towns, right? So like right now on Long Island, you can have a dispensary in parts of, not all of, parts of, this is, people goof this all the time, Babylon, Brookhaven, Southampton, and Riverhead. And even when you talk to folks in those places, they have not been educated by the state as to what this is or what this is not, what you can and cannot do. And that leads to a profound level of confusion. And, I remember having a conversation with the Babylon town supervisor about this at one point, and he was saying that the governor's office was encouraging him, go to the other towns, tell them to opt in. You guys are making a lot of money on these dispensaries, right? Like the highest selling dispensaries in per capita in New York State are in Babylon town. And he's like, no way. Like I would not wish the incompetence of this agency on any of my colleagues, Democratic or Republican. I'm just not doing it. And I think that tells you what you need to know about where this is all headed. So like, like folks need to like have a better understanding of what's coming to their community and what's not.
Do you think there was all him wanting to keep all the tax revenue for himself, given the fact that they were crushing it? And then the second part is, whose job is it to educate the people?
I think, well, I'll answer the second part of your question first. The job of educating the people falls on the state agency that was created to govern all this stuff, right? Like, it is the DMV that explains to you how to get a driver's license and ultimately like that you should not drink and drive and all of these things, right? It is the State Board of Elections that explains to you how to vote, when to vote, and what your voting options are. And thank God we have a lot of them now. Like state agency's job is to engage with people, right? Like, the Department of Health are the ones that told you, okay, this is where you can go to get your COVID vaccine, right? It's all state agencies doing their job. And, like, it is the state liquor authority that tells you that drinking while pregnant is still a bad idea. In every restaurant and bar, you have to educate people, and we're still figuring out how to do that when it comes to cannabis. And by the way, it's not just a New York problem. Like the same level of profound municipal stupid exists in New Jersey, in Michigan, Ohio. It's all out there.
What's the kind of relationship though between the department that regulates alcohol and the Department of Health, right? Like there's some sort of historic relationship that they have, right? From a messaging standpoint. And do you think that maybe some of this is just hasn't been fully established yet between the Department of Health and cannabis, or those kind of Department of Finance or Economics maybe?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that those relationships either don't exist or have not been fortified in a way that is meaningful, and they should be, right? Like you have a situation where the Department of Health works in concert with DMV to encourage folks to opt into organ donation, right? Last time you renewed your license, you got prompted, oh, hey, by the way, do you want to be an organ donor? Now, of course, that system doesn't work because New York has the lowest donor designation rate in the country. It's 20% of New Yorkers are organ donors. It's messed up. I am too.
We're pretty much the minority. Look at us.
We are, yeah. We are so far in the minority. We might as well be like the Green Party at this point.
I'm looking for a home.
I think a lot of us are, my friend. But yeah, so like that level of education, I think is like so necessary. If you're because right now, the number the OECM gave out last week is 56% of municipalities in New York State have opted out. Right. So the majority of, towns, villages, cities have said no. And by the way, a lot of the smart ones, like, for example, like the village of Saddle Rock in Nassau County, which I believe is just like 3 blocks of palaces that happens to be a village, they opted in. Why? Because they get a piece of the state's tax revenue, even though there is no commercial activity in this village. Like you couldn't put a weed store there if you wanted to, but yet they get a piece of the pie. And, the village of Kensington or the village of Hempstead or, whatever the case may be that opted out don't. Wild stuff.
But the delivery aspect, again, like it blows my mind because even though the town opts out, delivery can still exist for the residents of that town.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, we joked that some very, very smart person is going to open up a dispensary in Little Neck, Queens, so that like North Hempstead moms can get their medicine. And like, I happen to know that guy. He's making a lot of money.
Yeah, sick. That was free advice. So we got to pivot gears because with January 20th happening and Trump signing an enormous amount of executive orders, did you have to slow down some of your efforts early in the year in anticipation for what could be the unknown going forward? How did you have to handle all that?
Yeah, we definitely. We knew there was going to be a flurry of activity, but it's Trump and he is unpredictable. I'm going to try to take partisan politics out of this, right? The guy's unpredictable, and oftentimes he has threatened a thing and then immediately pivoted back, right? Like look at the tariffs with Mexico, right? It was 15% yesterday, it's 0 today, and now suddenly we have billions of dollars for border protection. So we weren't sure how much was bluster and how much was not. But we did tell some of our clients in the renewable energy space, like he's coming after offshore wind. He's been pretty clear about that. So like, don't get caught, dumbfounded when I'm cleaning that up quite a bit. Don't act surprised when he, starts talking about the need to like bring back coal, and nuclear and all this stuff. Like we joked that he was probably going to lift the prohibition on whaling. Like that's how anti-environment this guy is. And still, like folks in renewable energy space were like, oh my stars, I can't believe the executive order, the audacity of this man. And we were like if you couldn't see that coming, like maybe you should go manage the gap. Like maybe you should go do something else with your time, because like you have to be able to anticipate this coming. I think the one constituency group in advocacy world that did see this coming was the folks in the immigration space. Like there have been safeguards put in place to do their level best to protect folks. Because I mean, I think folks that work in immigration specifically are sick of hoping someone's better angels prevail. I think that ship has sailed a long time ago, and so they were as prepared as one can be. That didn't stop what happened from having a negative effect on the lives of lots of people, but that was the intention.
So with a board like having Governor Christie, do you lean into his expertise or people around him to try to get a better understanding of what you think will happen with the flurry of activity early on? Or is it really too hard to understand people close to him on what his current actions are? Like where is that balance and their understanding?
Right. You're referring to the fact that Chris Christie's on the board of Mad Global. Okay. Yeah, well, I mean, that is the case because the CEO of the company has a long time relationship with the former governor of New Jersey, as is the case with former New York Governor Patterson, who also sits on the board. I think that one of the firm's biggest accomplishments last year was our Ohio office was pivotal in sending JD Vance to the vice presidency. And so I think that, there are folks, there are clients, they're not my clients, not folks I'm involved with. I'm not a subject matter expert here. But that certainly, like, there is a capacity to do that kind of a work within a national firm.
That is where I think the information is so valuable, right? From an internal standpoint, exactly like you were saying before, is like sometimes when you wanted to get meetings, you had to tap other people in order to get that information. But when you have resources that are close to the president and the vice president, maybe the information kind of comes as a heads up. Hey, Jeff, like just giving you a heads up.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's our job to, on the state level, be like, hey, listen, this is what we think the governor is going to say in the state of the state. This is either going to be really good for you or really bad for you. Or if you don't like what you think, what we anticipate is going to be there as part of the state's priorities moving forward, let's talk about it and find a way to get them to change what they're going to say, because this policy is wrongheaded, right? That's something we've done a lot of. And there are certainly, folks who work within like the K Street space who do the same thing on the federal level. Like, we've heard the State of the Union is going to involve XYZ thing. We don't like. We're fine with X thing, but not YZ thing. So let's find a way to lean on the White House to change their rhetoric here. And that also happens too when governors give what are called budget addresses. But I believe the New Jersey budget address is coming up, where they lay out the priorities for each individual state's budget. Which unlike federal budgets, state budgets are like a social document. There's all sorts of stuff that gets shoved in there that affects a lot of people's lives.
One of the areas that the government is doing in New York is giving away money. Did I understand that correctly?
In a macro sense, yes. So one of the governor's proposals within the state of the state is to use the state's surplus. That's right. New York is in the black, and use some of that money as a way to defray costs for people who are at a certain income level is the proposal on the table right now. Now that requires the approval of the state legislature. So I don't know if that's going to come to fruition, or and I'm sure there's a lot of ideological schools of thought as to whether giving away more free money is a good thing. Right? Conservatives view even things like paid family leave as an entitlement that we shouldn't be providing people, which a sentiment I do not agree with. But and there's not just that. This year's budget also involves a lot of proposed grant money for small businesses throughout the state, especially for things like workforce development, for apprenticeship programs, for businesses that do research, biotech, biomed. There's a real focus here on incubating those kinds of businesses and keeping them here. And of course, the most lucrative places, on Long Island, I think for folks with and without college degrees in the future are going to be in renewable energy once we get past this recent executive order kerfluffle. And also, we just passed a ballot proposition in Suffolk County that allows for billions of dollars in new sewer infrastructure to be built. That should keep a lot of plumbers employed for a long period of time. When I was teaching community college, I joked with my students, if you want to make $100,000 a year before your 30th birthday, pick up a wrench, learn to be a plumber, because there's a lot of work in that.
So just going back to what you said about J.D. Vance before, was there an opportunity to pick his brain just lightly on cannabis, to see his appetite, just to know, like, going forward, we think this guy's going to be an ally, or we're unsure of how he's going to handle it?
Well, I mean, I would say this, like the state of Ohio, while Vance was a senator, did pass a cannabis ballot prop, right? Ohio is in the process of setting up a program. I'm unaware of any on the record comments that he made. And as vice president, it's not. I don't think it's an issue area that he's going to be directly involved in. If you're looking at, and I might be wrong about this. I'm not putting words in anybody's mouth here. I think that if you're interested in what actors are going to be involved in the regulation or unregulation of cannabis on a national level, you should closely follow what's going to happen with Bobby Kennedy. It looks like he's going to get confirmed. Senator Bill Cassidy from Louisiana, who is himself a medical doctor, seems to be okay with him now. It would take 4 Republican defections to kill any nomination, the way that the chamber is currently structured. So it would appear he's going to go through. So a lot of our health policy is going to be determined by that agency. It would appear. I would say, though, my gut instinct on this is that when it comes to national policy on cannabis, you're seeing Missouri, Oklahoma, Mississippi, a lot of red state America is making a lot of money on hemp, which is 50 state legal. The Farm Bill is going to get reauthorized, I think, pretty uncontroversially. Anything could happen in Washington, but that seems to be where it's going. So like, why would we stop the red state gravy train by changing it up and starting the process of deregulating THC? I think to the uneducated consumer, the difference between 50 state legal hemp products and THC is fairly nominal. Right. And like, one you can get at a bar in Texas, one you have to go to a dispensary in New York or Massachusetts to get. And it's you guys know this. It's inherently the same plant.
It really is.
So if you ask me, like red state America is telling the White House, like if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Missouri made more money on in cannabis than New York did last year. Like why would you turn that spigot off and make them pivot into something else? When this is working.
Can't you accelerate it?
Sure. And I think like the next thing you'll probably see, and I wouldn't be surprised if the courts end up deciding this, by the way, is you'll start to see interstate commerce between permissive states, right? Like, I think you're a federal court case away from cannabis from California legally moving into Nevada or moving into Oregon, or like New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts being able to do business together when it comes to THC products. I think that's the next formative step. And also, like, I know we all like would love to live in a world where it's legal in all 50 states, but also in some ways be careful what you wish for, because like if this becomes like the biggest agricultural product in the country, which it could be, where's it going to get grown? Not in New York, right? They're going to grow it in places where they used to grow tobacco, where you have a better climate for it, right? So you're going to grow it in Georgia, you're going to grow it in Virginia, and so like you'll have like the craft producers up here, but like most of that business is probably going out of New York as opposed to into it. It's a lot more complicated than people make it out to be. I think advocates like create this like panacea that if the federal government does this, then all of a sudden everything is going to be copacetic in the industry and all of our problems are going to go away. We're just going to have new problems.
We don't make oranges in all 50 states, though.
That is true. That is true. They come from Florida generally. But like, also look at liquor, right? Like in most parts of the U.S., like, other than like the county where Jack Daniels is distilled, weirdly enough, like you can pick up a bottle of bourbon, right? But like that does not stop the industry from having a whole host of problems. Like you can buy cigarettes almost anywhere, but yet that industry has a whole host of problems. So like, they're just going to be different if you go and change the structure as it's presently constituted.
So do you think that there's ever like a world that like hemp and cannabis are just the same industry, or do you think that it just continues to kind of be these two very different markets and industries?
It would certainly take a federal policy change because, the hemp bill protects, the Farm Bill protects, right? And I think the longer we go with this dichotomy, the more people become entrenched in their own silos, right? Like, like for us, we've had potential clients ask us like, oh, do you guys do work in hemp? And we're like, no. They're like, oh, good. Okay. Like we don't talk to those people. Like, I'm sure you've noticed like some of the cannabis conferences, there's like this like kind of like West Side Story thing between the hemp people and the THC people, which is only exacerbated by the current problems. And so you're always going to have people, even if you waved your magic bong water wand and legalized THC everywhere, you would still have people who would say, hey, listen, hemp production is cheaper, the labor standards are different, because like remember, the cannabis industry in blue state America is like highly unionized, right? Whereas hemp is like not. So you could live in a world where like the folks that work in THC production and in dispensaries and things like that have to make X amount of money, right? Like they have to have the ability to unionize. You have to sign a labor peace agreement to open a dispensary in New York and anywhere really. Whereas, the guys doing hemp have none of those rules.
And they're selling similar products, right? Like they can sell THC infused chocolates, THC infused beverages to a certain extent, right? So it's an interesting little
yeah, and like to an uneducated consumer like myself, like I'd have trouble knowing the difference.
And you wouldn't, right? Like they would both give you a similar outcome.
Yeah.
That's the problem though, Jeff, because like if the three of us can't figure out the difference, there's zero chance that we could stand up there and explain to the same person who's scared that her son, if we legalize cannabis, is going to be addicted to crack, is going to understand that it's the same plant regulated a little differently, but it's the same, similar effects. Her mind's going to be blown.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The fact that the system has become so inherently convoluted just makes education that much more difficult, right? Like folks at the municipal level understand what a dispensary is, right? That's a store where you buy weed. Okay, got it. But then when you go to explain what a micro business is, or the difference between, cultivation, distribution, and processing, like, no idea what you're talking about. A quick story about this, if you'll indulge me. Speaking of clients saying dumb things, right? So we are about to go in front of Town Planning Department X, right, to talk about a possible dispensary project. And with all the municipalities are the same. They want to know how much parking you're going to create, how many jobs you're going to create, like, are you going to be up to fire code? Like, everyone asks the same questions. And so we're going through everything, and we've got a blueprint. And I'm like, okay, tell me what's going to go here, what's going to go here, what's going to go here, right? Because like you want these, I don't know if you guys are wrestling fans, but you want these meetings to be like a pro wrestling match, right? The outcome is predetermined. You know exactly what's going to happen, right? And so I point to one part on the blueprint, and I'm like, what's that? He's like, oh, that's where the consumption lounge is going to be. I'm like, okay, buddy, listen, they don't know what that is, and that's going to scare them. Do not say the words consumption lounge, okay? That sounds like a bunch of people get in a room doing drugs. Like, don't say that. No matter what you do not say consumption lounge, right? We're not doing that. Like, no one has any idea what that is. So don't say that. 3 minutes go by. We're in the meeting. The meeting's going exactly how I say it's going to go. How much parking? How many jobs? Give it the fire code. What goes here? What goes here? What goes here? And my client goes, well, that's going to be the consumption lounge. And me, again, like, and me and my staff are just like, have our head in our hands. Like, what did you just say, you moron? Like, I said, there's one thing you can't say. They don't know what that is. And it scares them. Like, don't say that. Like, don't use those words. Now we have to start again. Now, to your earlier point, all the work we did to legitimize you to these people is now it's in the toilet. Like, they think you want to create like an opium den in their municipality. So you're over now because you did the one thing I told you not to do.
But why should we cater to their fear mongering of their opium den perspective when in actuality, that's not the case.
Right. So there should be a level of education where the state, went to municipalities that opted in and be like, thank you so much for opting in. Here is what we, the state, are allowing people to do and not do. Right. And by the way, the state has not even issued regulations on consumption lounges. You couldn't build one if you wanted to. Like if municipality X was like, heck yeah, I love the idea of a bunch of people in a sweaty room smoking marijuana cigarettes. Let's do that. They couldn't, right? Like just understand, like this, you couldn't do what you wanted to, and they didn't know that either, right? So like, there has to be like a level of education where at least they say like, okay, the governor has signed this law. This is law, and this is what it does. Right. And again, like that doesn't happen. This is not unique here, whereas new stuff does not go well. Right. Like New York State is about to issue 3 downstate casino licenses. Right. So like we're going to join the ranks of New Jersey and Connecticut and have casinos in a major metropolitan area, which hey, listen, if it creates jobs, I'm all for it. A casino on Long Island might hasten the end of my marriage, but it is what it is.
There's one out here already.
Well, it's a slot parlor, dude. It's not a casino.
Says casino, but fair enough.
But like, what the state should do is explain, to these communities, like, okay, like these guys are coming. This is what it's going to mean. This is what you can do. This is what you can't do. And thankfully, what's happening there, different from cannabis, is the Vegas-based casino companies are being like are doing that doing that piece. They're educating the community. They're going out and saying like, hey, if we are awarded the license, here's what's going to happen. This is why you should not be afraid of your husband becoming a gambling addict and a louse, and why like you should not be afraid of like criminals in the streets, which by the way never happens when you build a casino. Like heroin will not come rushing into your communities because like someone can like throw dice in your community, right? They're doing that, right? Whereas like even like the cannabis companies didn't think it would ever be this bad, and like even the well-moneyed ones were did not take the time to try to educate the public, and now you have a willfully ignorant public, by the way, when it comes to this stuff.
Last question. What question do you wish more people asked you?
Wow. What question do I wish more people asked me? I guess, the one thing that's always bothered me is, because this is government and politics, and you see it on TV all the time. Our worst clients are the ones that think that they know better than us as to how government operates, right? I want more folks to say, I don't know, explain this to me. You're the expert on this. Not saying, I think I know what to do. Because odds are you don't. And like, I don't go into your place of business and tell you how to do things, right? I'm having my kitchen remodeled right now below me. And one thing I'm not going to do is march downstairs and tell the guy installing my cabinets how to do it. Because I have no earthly clue. So like, don't think because like you've seen an episode of Veep that you know how to do my job. It is the equivalent of being like, oh, listen, I'm gonna operate on myself. I watched some ER last night. Like I'm good, or like I'm gonna get in the cage and fight because I've been watching UFC. I wish there were not so many amateur experts on how this stuff works, and folks we're able to understand like this is a profession that requires a skill set.
I love it. So Jeff, for our listeners, they want to get in touch and they want to explain to you how you should do your job. Where can they find you?
My email address is J, my last name, Guillot @madglobalstrategy.com, or you can find me complaining about politics and baseball on Twitter. And I also, for strictly professional stuff, I also hang out on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, we got on the show notes. Thanks for taking the time.
I have strong thoughts about the Yankees pitching rotation at all times. So, if you're into that, I make a good follow.
Thanks for taking the time, Jeff. This was a lot of fun.
All right. This was awesome. Thanks so much, guys.